There, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today, we're looking at Chapter 16 of Book 7 of the Politics Doing of the Best Regime. Last Chapter 15, we saw the discussion shift from the best regime to the question of education of the regime, and how one educates it. And we dealt with the question of the question of that if dealing with nature, the three parts you said about things: nature, habits, and reasoning, right? Logos. And that nature, we've dealt with the question of nature. Now we have to deal with the question of habits and reasoning, and this is what education deals with. And that whole discussion about what is prior and what's that, the body and the soul, that whole discussion in the last chapter. Please go look at it to get it. We're continuing, therefore, from this point. Now, he says, therefore, the legislature should see to it that from the beginning, that the bodies of those being reared are to become the best possible. Care must be taken in the first place in connection with the union of men and women to determine when and with what quality of person marital relations ought to be brought about. So again, the question of best children. Eugenics. Oh my God! But no, we think of this. We have rules. We have rules. Every society has kind of rules. You can't marry a cousin. You can't marry a sister. You can't. Incest is no. Why incest no? It's not healthy. It's really biologically not good. It produces, in other words, incest does not does not tend to produce children that are healthy and benefit and are able, and it's actually worse. And the idea is and therefore we do say that sorry, you can't do certain types of relationships. You can't have certain types of relationships. Now we have a world where you can do whatever you want, man. I want to marry my animal. I want to marry myself. Now this the silliness of the current worldview we are in. It's not only silly; it's also perverse and sick. It's psychotic in a fundamental sense. What he's saying here that the idea is that the purpose of the legislator, the lawmaker, the person making laws, need to take into consideration the question of what is useful for the community. So if we're going to regulate who can marry and how they can marry, this is the purpose for the laws. So, oh my God, freedom! Our freedom is being again. But what good is freedom if you're not able to live well? Freedom is, in one sense, yes, it's a good state. It's being free, but freedom is not necessary. This is the problem. Freedom does not. Freedom means to be able to do good things, to be good, to to achieve what is best and beautiful among us. It is to, like he says in this discussion here, it is to be able to engage in thought. It's to have leisure and enable to gain thought. It is not to be servile. Okay, if you're, but what happens when you can do what you want? You make yourself servile. You're not free anymore. You're servile. You're torment. You are enslaved to your desires, and you cannot satisfy your desires. Then you are not free. You're not a free person. You're not at leisure. You're always You're always servicing your desires. Um, Next, let's go to the point about this regulating the purposes of what marriage relationship. So we don't allow people to marry young girls. Why? Because it's not healthy. There's a certain time that is best for a woman to have a child. That they shouldn't have a child too young because the child will be unhealthy and something could go wrong with the child. It's better that the certain levels of this question. So therefore, this is a issue. When should a people merge in a sense? One should legislate respect to this community, this question to the community of the best, with a view to the partners themselves and the length of time of their lives together. So the partners, the view to the type of partners, and the length of time of their lives together, in order that they arrive together in terms of their ages at the just same juncture, and their capacities are not dissonant. In other words, all the males still capable of generating in a female, and that the females are not capable, or the females capable and the males are not. For these things create conflicts and differences among them. So again, the question: who's capable? are you capable of producing children or you're not? The male and female, are they, who should be able, when they should be doing here. Now, what is the type? How long you share life together? Now, this is important. This determines this. Now, the question is, for the sake of this is all being raised, and for the sake of what is best for not only the sake of the community, but is also best for us of us. He goes as so therefore the double best, the best for the person, the good for the good for the good for the good person, the man, by man he means person, male or female, right? The good what is good for the human being, and then what is good for the community. Okay, the koinonia, the community, the shared life together of these people. And therefore, this question must not cause conflicts of this, right? Next, one should legislate with a view to this a succession of offspring. For the offspring should neither fall too short from their fathers in terms of age, and since older fathers get no benefits from the gratitude of offspring, nor their offsprings from the assistance rendered by fathers, nor too close. In other words, it must be different. What does the age gap? If it's too far, in other words, parents get no use from their offspring, the children, and then if they're too different, the children even get no assistance from the fathers. Okay, and if they're too close, then it's not so good either, right? They This involves less difficulties. This issue divides less respect. Less respect is presence in those of this sort as being contemporaries of their fathers, and closeness gives rise to accusations and connections with managements of the household. So they're too young, right? They're too very close to each other. Then this creates what he says contempt, right? If they're, in other words, less respect is present when they're same closeness. If you think, oh, if my parents are only like little older than me, I'm just as smart as they are, right? So the closeness as their age, as the distance between them and their age, then the child will have less respect for their parent. Okay, this is what he says here, and therefore, and what happens is, and closeness gives rise to accusations, connection to household management. Further, to return to where we begin, we began this digression to this point. One should legislate so that the bodies of offsprings in the process of generation become available in a way that will answer the will of the legislature. When people are able to have children, this is when this is possible. Then the legislature should be able to deal with this. Virtually all of these things result from a single sort of overseeing. Okay? Since the age of 70 at the outside defines, in most cases, the end of generation for men, and the age of 50 for women, this is the idea of menstruation, right? Some women have above 50 have children, but rarely. In fact, this is usually bad. If men who above 70 have children, their children tend to have more problems in their genetic problems. They have diseases. They have the traits in their gene. What they transmit is weaker. Something happens to our, as we old, our replication process of our genetics kind of start errors, and that what happens is that there's going to be more as we get to a certain age. Because remember, cell replication has two things. One is internal replication, and then for sexual reproduction, right? And therefore, the question of the errors are occurring in both stages. So therefore, all of a sudden, the amount of things that we're sending, the male who sends out is, women's eggs, right? Both of those are going to have, as they get older, get past a certain age, the errors increase, the age selection errors, and therefore, what happens? Well, you're sending error out. It's going to be the material that you're sending out to thing are going to have more errors in it than when you were younger and everything was processing properly. So therefore, this is the danger of this. He says. Therefore, 70 is when most men's this problems start happening. That's when the system kind of breaks down completely, breaking down completely, and that women it's around menstruation, right? This is the idea of this point. not menstruation. I mean, end of menstruation. This is when what do you call it? I know what it is. My brain I know what the term is. It's gonna drive me crazy. Forget it. You know what I'm talking about. Beginning and the beginning of the union in terms of their age should be such that they arrive at the conclusion of each of these things at the same time. So they should. The best relationship is that when men and women hit their end at the same time. If men are hit their 70s, the danger here in a relationship would be if men hit their the ends here. In other words, if since men hit their end at 70 and women at 50, therefore the danger here is that the relationship will end. For men will not have no interest. Men will still have an interest at 50. They'll still have an interest in having children, but they can't have it with that wife, so they get a new wife. Okay, so if you wish to have that the ends that the women and the man's their children activity end, you need to make sure that that it's 70. In other words, when the woman hits 50, the male hits 70. So wait a minute, that means what? There's going to be a 20-year difference between men and women, right? Aristotle seems to suggest that. So this is what's interesting here. Should arrive at the conclusion of this time. In other words, the mating of young persons is a poor thing with a view to procreation. Among all animals, very young. Now, it doesn't mean young, it means very young, like children, immature, like 12 years old and 10 years old and below 16. Okay. Even 15, 16-year-olds are not the best for reproduction. Has problems, right? If all of a sudden, in other words, among all animals, the issue of the young is incomplete, likely to bear females or in small figures. So the same must necessarily result in the case for human beings as well. So Aristotle was a biologist. He studied animals. He looked at animals and he noticed that when young animals, underdeveloped animals, when they had children, they got pregnant and had children, they tended to produce weak animals and mostly females, right? That's even more interesting in that sense. And then he goes that therefore, and this is also true. He says about humans. A proof of it is that in those cities where the union of young men and women is the local fashion, the children are incomplete in small bodies. Further, young women labor more in childbirth, and more of them die. Hence, some assert it was for such a reason that the oracle's response given to the Thracians that it was the result of always marrying off younger women that so many children are dying, not relating anything to the harvesting of crops. Again, the oracle the oracle is do not plow the young furrow is literally meaning a prohibition in its literal meaning a prohibition against the plowing of fallow land. I think that's the metaphor here. If the land is foul, too young to underdeveloped land, you don't plow on it. You have to let it mature and grow. Hence, the argument is that what is true about the cultivation of crops is also true about the cultivation of children in that sense. Right? This is the thing about this. Therefore, when the oracle said that thing, it was not about crops; it was about the children, about marrying their women too young, having their women have children too early. Further, it is advantageous with a view to moderation for women to be given in marriage when they're older, for they are held to be more licentious if they have practiced intercourse when young. When young. In other words, if they've had sex when at 12 or 13, they're going to be promiscuous. It's better that they're chaste and that they're not, so they do it. There'll be more faithfulness. It's interesting. The idea that the Greeks had a big problem with promiscuity. The Greeks had a big problem about promiscuity, and that's why they locked women. The Greek culture usually locked women in the household. Greek culture at the time, women were locked, except for the Spartans. The only women that were out in the public area were slaves or prostitutes, okay, who were mostly slaves also, or unfree, unfree, they were not citizens. Citizen women, women who were citizens, were not. They were in the household. They were in the realm of the household, and they were locked from the idea of this. That women who were they were if they were out getting in the public spheres, they were seen as slaves, not free citizens, and prostitutes. All right, and this is what we have to understand about the Greeks. The Greek, in fact, in the Arab world, in their way they treat women is very similar to the way the Greek world treated women. The idea was what? Why did they treat them this way? This was because the question of, well, how do you know the children are your children? You don't. Women know the children. Women's it's obvious that they're giving birth to it, right? But men don't know. Men do not share the same knowledge or certainty about the offspring as being their offspring as they do. Hence the locking up and sequestering of women was a means of ensuring legitimacy of your children, or that the children that you have with your wife will be your children. Right? That's how the Greeks did this, and therefore this is why this is the Greek practice in a sense, right? Hence, this is this idea that it's a advantage review of moderation for women to be given in marriage when they're older. This is that they're doing with this. Also, the bodies of males are held to be injured with respect to growth if they've had intercourse while the seed is still growing. Okay, for there is a definite length of time for this as well, after which you'll be no longer plentiful. Hence, it is fitting for women to unite in marriage around the age of 18. Ooh, 18. For men, 37 or a little before. Now, this is like, okay, what's going on here? Some words have been dropped out here. Now, here's the old thing. Aristotle here seems to be arguing that, you have to have maturity. Now, what does this do? That men are being older. They have grown. They have maturity. They've had their skills. Um, um, and actually, by this age, you understand that they'll peak together. When the women at 50, you can all have children, the men will be at the same stage. In other words, their sexual proclivities are timed together. They'll have their time together. And the age, the parents will be older, the men will be, in other words, as they become pet children, parents there have age. You have like significant age difference between father and child, so that there's not going to be disrespect. There'll be respect in the sense. And another thing is the purpose of the husband and wife is that the husband is going to have more experience in life than the wife, and therefore this is the problem. If when women and when the children women the boy and man and female are about the same age, the woman is going to, because of the reality of the organic biological factors, are going to be more mature than men in their own age. That's always been the problem, right? That's always been the case, they say. So therefore, what he's saying here is that, therefore, to ensure that there is kind of by having them in, what's going to happen is the women will kind of dominate when their ages when they're marrying together at 18 or 19 together, or maybe even 20, they're at the same age. The women is slightly going to be, for realities of the body and things, are going to be more mature. And this is not, Aristotle suggests that this is double fold problem. One is that the men will not be of authority, and what happens when they have children, the children are not going to respect them. And what's going to happen is, oh God, the children are similar in age, closer to the age. They're not going to have that thing like this. Then what happens is even more interesting, as when women hit their 50s and men hit their 50s, the men still can have children. Women can't. So he will leave. This is the midlife crisis, changing wives. I'm a successful and now at 50 he's going to be more successful, have resources, have the success that he didn't have when he was 20, 18, 20. He's going to be more confident, and is not going to hit. In other words, he's at a peak, and he may be, and his children are now going to, not necessarily, he doesn't look at his children as really his, and in that sense that they are, they they don't show him the respect he deserves because they remember him how he was. Um, he will want new children, children that this explains why divorce happens in that sense. This is why the divorce will happen in that sense, because the men will say, "Well, my God, I want a new wife. I want a young, I want children. I want new children. Children are going to see me in my new status and see me at this level and look at me this way with respect and status." In other words, you want to. The question is that parents need they seek respect or admiration from their children. If they're too close, this is the danger. Too close, you don't get that admiration. You can get friendship, but that's not admiration in a sense. At such an age, union will occur when the bodies are in their prime and will arrive at the conclusion conveniently for both of them with respect to the succession of procreation. Further, the succession of offspring, if births occur shortly after marriage, as can reasonably be expected, it will be for them the beginning of their prime. For while the father it will be when their age has already run the course in their 70th year. When a union should take place, then has been spoken of. Those are this idea. As regards with respect to the season, the practice of most people at present is a fine one, setting apart winter as a time to begin cohabitation. So therefore, they usually get married in spring and summer, and then they fall, and then winter they cohabitate. Right? Married persons themselves should study what has been said by doctors and experts in natural science regarding procreation. Doctors give an adequate account of the occasions best suited for procreation with respect to the conditions of the body, and experts in natural science of the winds, they're praising the northerly rather than the southern one. This is again the science of that time, of the forces of nature and the forces of things, how they affect. We don't today. Our natural sciences have changed greatly, and has gotten more accurate, and so we know how to. Therefore, the science of today, his specific thing is repeating the science of the time. He would now, if he was writing this today, would say much different things. Winds would not pay as much attention to this. Again, if you look at biology of how it was understood back then versus how it was understood now, it's more. What we now know is we know more about the workings of the body. They knew a lot about the workings of the body, but they didn't understand genes. They didn't understand viruses and things like this as much as we now understand. And because of that, we have more understanding and therefore more control and more ability to do this. As regard now I turn to paragraph section 12, right? As regards the quality of the body, that which would be most beneficial to offspring in the process of generation, we must stop to speak at a moment length in the discourses concerning management of children, right? We must stop here, the management of children. At the present, it is enough to speak of it in outline. So therefore, this question is 93. There is no discussion about this other rest of the thing in Aristotle writings of any sort. So he talks about we should talk about it later. We're going to stop here, and we're going to talk about at present is not to speak of an outline. It's a question of a speak of it at length. In other words, this question of when is it, what types of person should be. In other words, or what quality of the body, should be to the offspring. In other words, the kind of bodies we should have. He says this doesn't have. He says, and this should be only a bigger discussion should be happen, but we don't get it. That's the whole problem. The body disposition of athletes is not useful either with a view to the good conditions required of the citizens or with a view to health and procreation, and neither is one that is overtly valetudinarian and ill-suited for exertion, but a middling sort between these two. In other words, it shouldn't be something like a weak kind of under strength, weak, and it shouldn't be a super athlete. It should be something middle. An athlete, the condition of the athlete is too extreme. In other words, people boasting up their bodies, they're not. That's not necessarily good for the child. The hormones and um, the hormones that are playing in the body are too extreme, and that might harm the development of the child. Okay, the argument is. Whereas the other one is too weak and too lax, and it's going to be not suited and doesn't have the strength, and that could be therefore that can pass bad traits to the child as well. One should have the disposition formed by one should have a disposition formed by exertion, but not by violent exertion. Okay, this is the athlete is the violent exertion. It needs to have, there was not no exercise, some exercise, some health, not so weak that they can't exert at all. They have to be able to do work, do labor, but they do tasks and do activities, but not that they are such that they do violent labor, right? And not with a view to one thing only. Okay, therefore, like athletes' dispositions, but with a view to actions regarding free people. In other words, 94 free people renders liberal renders lethoi, the liberal arts, which is closely related to free, the eutholoi. In other words, the free the idea of this free people, liberal persons, the free people. I think is the word really, the free people. Um, let's see, move this down here for a second. I want to get this picture. So what is he saying here? Even pregnant women ought to take care of their bodies. In other words, okay. And these things should be present in a similar fashion to men and women, right? There's some level of exercise. Not doesn't mean going to the gym every day, going to the gym. That is this cult, lifting. That's too much. Enough exercise that you're healthy. I don't do enough. I'm a bad example. I'm a bad example. I'm just too old and too old and too lazy to do this, and I've always been that. Okay. But not always, but But he's saying that this is also true about men and women, right? Even pregnant women ought to take care of their bodies, not remaining idle or taking meager sustenance. In other words, they should eat regularly, and don't have to meager sustenance, eat properly, but also they should go out and do things. They shouldn't just lie in bed the whole time, okay? Now, there might be reasons if the child is at risk and that they might do that, but the rule is no, they should be engaged, they should be doing things. This is easy for the legislature to do by mandating that they make a trip every day to worship the goddess who has been granted the prerogative of childbirth. No, this is 95 note. Okay, let's do this 95 note. The goddess Artemis and Ithria are particularly referred to. Artemis and Eleutheria are the ancient gods who dealt with childbirth, right? In the mind, however, unlike the body, may fitly spend time in more idle fashion. However, unlike the body, this is the problem. In this section, you don't have to, the body has to be not idle, completely idle. The mind can't. The mind, however, unlike the body, may fitly spend time more idle fashions. Not always working. For offspring, in the process of generation evidently draws resources from the one bearing them, just as plants do the earth. So therefore, in other words, as child is being born, the one who's bearing them, the child is taking resources and things from and things from them. So if the mother is exercising and consuming food, this is good because why the child is getting the resources. If the mother is not exercising and therefore and not as being weak and because they're weak status and not eating, not taking proper nourishment, the child is not getting that is not transferring to the child. Now he says concerning exposure, in the rearing of offspring when they are born, let there be a law that no deformed child should be raised. Okay, this is the smart one. But that none should be exposed after they are born on account of the number of offspring, where the arrangement of customs forbid procreation beyond a certain number. In other words, if there's a rule about how many children you should have, and if you have children and it's born healthy, you shouldn't expose them. Okay? Exposing them here is the way of how they got rid of bad. No, you shouldn't. The idea of that this is beta abortion. This is abortion. Aristotle says, well, if there's a child is going to be actually not even abortion. This is infanticide, really. This is infanticide here. Not just mere abortion. This is the child is born. So therefore, in other words, no deformed child should be raised. Eugenics. Just come out in the woods, let them die. Let nature take care of it. In other words, you expose them. You expose them to nature and let nature deal with them. Not just this is interesting. Exposure does not necessarily what happens when someone else takes them and rears them. Or animals will probably kill them, right? They're weak in their things, and they'll be hunted by the animals. But the idea is that the law is that no form they've exposed them, right? But that, however, none should be exposed after they are born on account of the number of offspring. So therefore, you shouldn't expose them. And once they're born, you shouldn't expose them. If they're healthy children, they're not deformed, you don't expose them. This is even, I would even say this is would even apply to the question of abortion. If the child is unhealthy, you can abort. Aristotle says maybe you should abort it. But if you know it's going to be unhealthy, it's not, it's genetically going to have a disease or things, abort. In other words, uh, 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 this is where Aristotle and what we call Catholic social teaching on abortion are completely at odds. Aristotle will have no problem about abortion. It's very funny that the Catholic Church embraces Aristotle so significantly and moral teacher on here. Aristotle has no problem about abortion this way. Now he has a problem about it when you have healthy children. In other words, if you have a healthy child, you're doing it for just because you don't want to. That's not that's not sound in that sense. That's not even good. It's my body and I can do what I want. But it's a child. That is not the position of a free person. That's a view of a despot. Okay, someone who's acting like a master of their own bodies to a great degree. That therefore they and so they're treating what is produced by them as merely their property, and it's not merely their property. It is another being whose well being will be beneficial to you in the future. So that there's none should be exposed, in other words, on account of the offspring and arrangement of customs prohibiting a certain number. Right, this is that we shouldn't be disposing of that. A number should be a number should indeed be defined for procreation. This is 96. Text means uncertain here. This is that famous line. That should be, in other words, we should have an idea of how many children we want for procreation. But in cases of birth, in case of birth, in consequence of intercourse contrary to these, abortion should be introduced before preception and life arises. In other words, the question is that if you're going to have a situation where there's going to be cases where there's not choice, rape, incest, defect, a kind of a threat of the health of the mother in that sense, you should do it before what happens. Two, the argument is that they should be induced before perception and life arises. In other words, so the question is, when does life begin? Life begins, the argument is that the biologist, well, the more we understand about biology, the more we understand that life actually begins when the seed and the egg get together. Okay, right? Conception. Right? So Catholic position is actually what was the position of the church actually became what science discovered. Right. The difference here, but then perception. Perception. When does the fetus start feeling things, perceiving things? Now that's not immediate. There's development, and at a certain point of development, they start the a fetus starts reacting and perceiving its environment. Now that is the problem. It's not only life, but also perception and life arises. And he says, what is holy and what is not will be defined by reference to perception and life. And I think this is why the church kind of likes Aristotle. It says that what is holy and what is not holy is tied to the question of life and perception. So that's why what abortion is always defined, has to be defined. The legitimacy or illegitimacy of abortion is always tied to these questions of life and what is the being alive, and is there a perception. But it's not just life; it's life and perception of the living creature, living being. 16. Since the beginning point of the age when a man and a woman ought to begin their union has been defined. The idea of 18 for men and 30 something for 37 for something for men, and 18 for women. Right. Let us define also for how much time it is fitting for to them to do public service with respect for procreation. In other words, how much time should they be doing fitting? How much time is it fitting for them to do public service with respect to procreation? The issue for older persons, like that of younger persons, is born incomplete both in body and mind, while that of persons of old age is weak. Hence, time may be defined on the basis defined on the basis of the mind's prime. So, when is the mind prime? Most persons, this comes in most persons. This comes as some of those poets have said, who measure age in periods of 7 years, around the time of the 15th year. Okay. Within 4 or 5 years after this age, they should be released from generation for public purposes. So the idea is the poet who said measured age is in periods of 7 years, right? So, okay, so what is the 5 times 7 is what? Well, 5 times 6 is 30. So 35. I did 35. Would be. It's clearly, I think, in one sense, he's talking about men here. Now, this is what 97. And 97. Let's look at this 7 years thing. This is from Solon, right? This is a quote from Solon, right? So within 4 or 5 years after this age, they should be released from generation of public purpose. In other words, the law should say you don't have to have children. If you have a law saying you have to have children. In other words, the Athenian law was that every citizen must have and if you didn't have children by a certain age, penalties and fines could be done and punishments could be done because you weren't going to. You needed to produce citizens. You needed to produce children for the city. Why? Because the city needed bodies to defend it. Okay, to defend it and to secure that its defense. So that citizens were obliged. This idea, the citizens had obligations to produce offsprings for the purposes of the stake of the city. So that therefore, this idea of 7 year cycles, so within 4 or 5 years after the age, they should, in other words, once their 15th year, 5 years after that, the 15th, and 15th is 7, right? Or 15th, around the time of their fifth. Okay, now this is really where I think this is weird. And most persons come, some poets said of the age measures in period of 7 years, around the time of 50th, 50th year. So therefore, this is the idea of the idea of the prime. Right? Okay, this is the idea of the prime. Again, this I suppose says a period of 7 years. Okay, but the 50th year. Okay, that's okay. I missed the math I did there was totally wrong. I was assuming I thought it was 7 times 5, right? Fifth. I looked at it wrong. I saw a fifth. It's 50th. It's not about that. 50th year is the idea for men is this is the prime. You're at your best. Okay, the idea here, and that so within 4 or 5 years after this age, they should be released from public for public generation for public purposes, and for the time remaining, it should be evident that they have had relations for the sake of health or for some other reason of this sort, right? Concerning this is concerning relations with another man or another woman. Let it be considered simply not a beautiful thing to indulge in it at all in any way when one is or sorry. In other words, now concerning relations with another man or another woman, let us consider simply. Let it be considered simply not a beautiful thing, not a good thing, not a kalos. It's not a kalos, good, beautiful, or good thing, fine thing. To indulge in it at all, in any way, when one is or is referred to as a spouse. So no, when one is a spouse, one is married to someone. If you're a spouse, you should not be engaging having sex with either a man or a woman, another woman, or a woman should have sex with a man or another woman. If someone should be found doing some such thing during the period of procreation, let the person be punished with the loss of honor appropriate to the external behavior, the errant behavior. In other words, if they engage in it in their procreative period, then that's this. They have loss of honor. They have to be embarrassed. They have to be humiliated, because this is the way to ensure that people know that their children are legitimate, and they're doing this because of that. That's okay. That's dishonorable. You have to be punished. You have to be shamed. You have to be humiliated, because this is dangerous for the children, dangerous for the community. So Aristotle ends the chapter on that point. Well, let's stop here. We'll stop here, and if you have any questions, please put the questions here. This is a weird chapter because it's totally shocking to our understanding. And I think many of this discussion is tied to the Mediterranean culture, the reality of this. Montesquieu would disagree with him on here. Montesquieu, who like thousands of years later, will also address this question in his Spirit of the Laws about the different political cultures and climate. Well, in other words, he would argue that this question here is really defined by climate as much as anything else. Aristotle is kind of doesn't. Again, this is also addressed in the best regime. So, in this best regime is going to be a Mediterranean regime of this situation. He's not addressing it in the. He's ignoring the difference of environment and culture, because he's getting what is prayed for. So that's, again, we have to remember this chapter is what is prayed for. It's best, optimal. And what is best is this median condition of the Mediterranean, right? So therefore, this is assuming that the ideal situation of the Mediterranean, all this discussion of education and so forth, is. What happens when that isn't present? Maybe you're talking about a different situation. Therefore, maybe there might be, Aristotle probably would have agreed with Montesquieu here in changing his teaching here. In cold climates and warmer climates, the question of when you should marry will differ. I think maybe colder climates may actually lead it to younger procreation, and again, what's best and what's worse. This question here. So let's stop here. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below, and I will respond to them when I see it. If you have any comments or issues you want to talk about this chapter. The other thing is, if you liked it, like it, share it with a friend, share it with a colleague, share it with somebody you do it, put it on social media, spread the news. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. Now, if you didn't like it, you can always thumb down and say why in the comments, please. What's wrong, and maybe I can learn from it. Another thing you can do, if you like the things and like what I'm doing here, you can follow me on social media, which links below. I'm not, I'm a little active on Facebook, but I'm more active. I'm more active on Facebook only because I keep in touch with friends and things like this. Um, uh, I do some stuff on Twitter, but not too much. I'm not that active on Twitter. I should be probably more. I do post things occasionally. Um, that's the way to do it. Now, if you want to help me doing something here, you can see the subscribe star and Patreon. Want to help contribute me doing these kind of things? Well, please do so. I could use the help, man. I could really use the help. As social as the prices of things going up, like high. Another thing you can do to help me, you can buy my book. I have other books. You buy them too. Please buy them. But if you buy this book, you help me more directly. This is published by Lulu. I get if you buy it, it's available on Amazon, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the online sellers they make as available. But if you buy by Lulu directly, I get what the bookstore gets. Now, what is this? Notebook on Aristotle's politics. Okay, this is directly talking about the politics, right? This is really focused. This is a Cliff's Notes on the politics. It's designed for students who are studying the politics, be it introductory students or be it more advanced students. This book helps access and gives you kind of looks through the book by book, chapter by chapter. It offers an introduction to how you understand the text, how the text developed, questions of understanding like the number system, how they're ordered, the book's ordered, and things like that. It deals with questions. When looking at the chapters, the questions of the themes, it will give graphs. I will graph certain things out. I will look at charts. I'll go offer you charts and lists. I will point to highlight some of the kind of questions that are kind of being addressed or involved here. So it's again it raises what are the questions that are being addressed, the themes that are being addressed, uh, um, and reflecting on that in terms of this. And it also has room for notes, so you can put your own notes on things here. After every chapter, I put a page where you can put your notes that you think. And in fact, if you have additional notes, you can put them in the margin in that sense. So therefore, this is a very useful book for those who are doing it. And by buying it, you will help me greatly. So therefore, that's it. Um, uh, uh, Please buy it. Please give a friend. In other words, and thank you very much for being with me today. And next time we'll look at the next chapter, and I think it is the last chapter of this. It's chapter 17 of book 6, and we will finish the books. Book 7. It is chapter 17 is the last chapter of book 7, and we'll with it we will finish book 7 up. Okay. Take care and have a nice day. Take care. Bye bye.